You're listening to the Vent Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast, a production of the Vent Marketplace, your source for premium wine and spirits at ventmarketplace.com. And this episode is presented by Corvin. Corvin is the world leader in at-home wine preservation, allowing you to pour a glass of your favorite wine and enjoy more bottles from your cellar without ever having to pop the cork. And technically not for the 150th time, because it didn't start the first couple episodes with Billy and I together, but the 150th episode of the Vent Podcast. And I'm joined by Billy Galanko, who we've had almost 3 years together now on the podcast.
Yeah. It's so nice of you to join us all the way from Las Vegas today to make it happen. But yeah, it's been a long run. We really appreciate everybody who's been listening with us for the whole time, and a lot of people who have just discovered us over the past years and are going back and seeing some of our early episodes. We definitely have come a long way in terms of back in the day, we were talking about Vent collections and the company more, and we've really come into our own over the past years. So thanks to everyone who has been with us.
Yeah, it's worth going back and listening to some of our earlier episodes. I think one thing that's been really special about the podcast over these 3 years is we've had great guests really from the start, which has been super fun. And yeah, there's definitely episodes all the way back to episode 20, 30, 40, 50 that you can enjoy. So take a listen. For nostalgia's sake, maybe we'll post a few of our favorite episodes from the archive on social and stuff over the coming days. So yeah. Billy, what do we have today?
But one note on the archive there, all episodes are now available on YouTube Music and YouTube. So if you want to go listen, there you go. Yeah, no, I'm doing really well today. I had actually a really exciting tasting that I'll touch on quickly over the weekend, and then we'll get to the news and our guests for today. But I went to a tasting, it was more of a top tier tasting. So it was the Krug, the latest release of Krug 172. I got to try the 2007 Comte de Champagne Rosé. There was a Didier Dagenau, and it was his XX1, which is basically in 2021, according to the person leading the tasting. I haven't dug into it as much. He normally makes a handful of single vineyard Puy Fumé wines that are highly sought after. And this year, nothing really was up to par, just due to a lack of, I guess it was mildew and some other issues. Actually, she didn't say mildew, but basically there was smaller yields. He couldn't make his normal wines, so he blended it all into one, made one cuvee. So that was really neat. And then we had I can't remember exactly how it's pronounced, Arjan, but it's basically the Mouton Rothschild white wine. So that was it was a more recent release of that, which was really exciting. Mostly Sauvignon Blanc with some Semillon, Muscadel, and there was actually another grape in there that I'm forgetting, but it was really cool. Long age-worthy Bordeaux Blanc. That was really neat. My first wine that I've gotten to taste from Moutons, since I haven't actually had any Mouton myself before. And then we wrapped up with a Leoville Las Casas from 2001. That was amazingly still vibrant, so fruity. I would have guessed it was much younger than it was. So that was really cool. And then finally wrapped up with a 2008 Dominus, which was as concentrated and interesting as I expected. So it was quite the tasting.
Was it at K&L?
We don't want to talk about competitors on the podcast, but it might have been.
Let me back up. How much do you pay for tastings like this?
This was only $75. And
okay, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That sounds like quite a lineup.
Yeah. I think it was underrated, and because it was not really well attended. And I think they were saying they had technical glitches. So I was very confused because I thought this was going to sell out like right away.
Yeah.
But that was great. And yeah, it's really propelling my MW studies. I need to be able to taste on all ends of the spectrum. So it's obviously really easy to taste on the lowest end, but if we're going to be tested on 20, 30-year-old Bordeaux, I got to get more access to it.
I thought you guys got a bottle of Lafite or something last year that May brought back from...
That was DRC.
DRC.
It was Grenache though. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Oh, very good. Yeah, have had a little bit of a cold. Didn't do much wine drinking this past weekend. My dad said I should have drank whiskey. Would have helped. So.
Awesome. I'm excited to get to first the news, and next we'll get to our guests for today. The news that we're going to get to, speaking of DRC, will be that this vintage in Burgundy, they're calling it the most challenging vintage in 50 years. That might be a little bit of hyperbole, just when it's a good vintage, it's the wine of the century. But it looks like due to various factors, weather, disease pressure, the yields are going to be down across the board. But apparently end of the year, it warmed up. It was bright and sunny. So what was remaining seems to be shaping up really well, especially for the reds. Could lead to some concentrated, ageable, highly ageable red wines. But they did note that it might drive up prices, which is the last thing that we need for Burgundy.
Yeah, which is funny because there was, over the last year or so, just a little bit of price leveling out or a bit of compression, and it's going to be another spike up for Burgundy again. It sounds like, yeah, for those who were hoping to swoop in and take advantage of some price settling, it's probably not going to last too long.
Yeah, especially some of these like top domains. The way that they're going to deal with these things is not necessarily come out with a wine that's any lower quality. That's just a lot of work in the vineyard sorting. And then again, when they get to the winery and the sorting table, they were noting in this article that there's just a ton of sorting going on. So it's going to be really high caliber, no matter like where you're getting it from, not judging by the way that things ripened at the end of the year, but it's just they're comparing it to 16 in quantities, especially for the whites. We shall see. We'll see how that impacts when they're released.
Yeah. And we have some news on this side of the pond too, in terms of the California estate getting acquired, or portfolio, really.
Yeah. We'd be remiss if this wasn't in our last week's news. It just happened this week, but Duckhorn Portfolio was acquired for $1.95 billion by a private equity group. I think this is, personally, I was surprised by the size of this acquisition, and it's really interesting to see the wine world, some of these private equity companies betting big on the wine space.
$2 billion. There's a lot of assets in there. We'll see how they either spin them out or combine things, or what they end up doing.
Yeah. Pivoting to this interview, we have James Walker as our guest today. And I came across James on social media. I think many people may know him from there. He's famed for his wine swirls across both like Instagram and TikTok, as well as Twitter. But he is just a restaurant business person. He's been all over the world. He helps open a lot of different restaurant chains. He's really ingrained in the food world. He worked as a chef early on in his career and really has expanded out and become extremely successful to the point where he can buy some of the best wines in the world. But what's really neat is he came across wine in the same way that like maybe Brady and I did. We discovered it in little bits and pieces. People showed himself along the way, and his passion is slowly but surely grown to enormous heights, where now he has a giant wine cellar. He's on the list. He gets annual allocations from places like Harlan and Sina Qua Non and Screaming Eagle, so that he's drinking some of these top tier wines. But in the conversation, it was so cool because he's just really just so passionate about wine, and he's very humble about it. He doesn't really lean into any of the snobbery at all. He doesn't want to say he's anti snobbery, but he doesn't want to say he is the anti snob. Yeah.
He's super down to earth, and you can even see that, I think, in the way that he engages on social media. He's only interested in sharing great wines that he's having, sharing amazing pictures of food and wine that make you, that honestly, if these wineries would come and just pull his content of him, posting pictures of swirling their wine in glass next to a beautiful plate of food, they would sell 2-3x more bottles. So he's great. Yeah. He's great at building community around wine, great at drawing people into a conversation about wine, and definitely a good person to follow along with if you're on Instagram or Twitter and want to fill your feed up with really good wine content, but also awesome food content as well.
Yeah. I would definitely add to that. He notes in the podcast that he doesn't want to post anything. He only posts food that he really enjoys, food and wine he enjoys. So he's not on there reviewing. He's not going to be posting things like 2 stars or 3 stars. It's really just positive vibes. He really wants everybody to get into the space. He talks about how he tries to help his friends learn more about wine, or people who don't know as much. He's very inclusive and trying to bring everybody in. And it just reminds me how I'm going along my wine journey, except he can just buy the top wines in the world. That's what he's sharing. And I'm just trying to find those values, but he also does drink the cool values from around the world as he gets exposed to them. So very neat conversation.
We took his interview solo. I wasn't on it. Like, you didn't ask him what camera he uses for these photos. There's no way he's using an iPhone for these pictures. These are like professional shots. When you go to a restaurant and you take a picture of your plate of food and it ends up looking like a dingy takeout meal, no matter how beautiful it looks in person, his pictures do not look like that. So I would say that he's a talented food and wine photographer as well. So.
That's very true. All right. Shall we get to the interview?
Yep. Sounds good. But just remember, before we get to our interview, we have a note from Corbin. If you're looking to drink more wine like James Walker drinks from your cellar without worrying about the wine that you can't consume, one of the Corbin systems will be your best friend. You can visit Corbin.com and use code VINT15 for 15% off your purchase of one of their devices. And remember, if you're a member of the trade, visit trade.corbin.com for exclusive discounts on the range of products and accessories for your home and work. And without further ado, here is Billy's interview with James Walker.
Hi, James. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, or I guess at least virtually here with you.
I really appreciate it. I know you're a really busy man, so I really appreciate you taking the time out. But yeah, I came across you and your wine passion just serendipitously. I think I was on Instagram, probably one of the social channels where with your swirls and just your whole passion for wine being exuded everywhere. Can you share a little bit about your background of what you do day to day and how you developed your wine passion? And we'll get into that more deeply, obviously.
Sure. So I've been in and around the restaurant business for, I'm going to say 20 years. It's actually longer than that, but I don't, in my heart, I don't have the strength to say how long it's really been. But the day job, if you will, is I run and develop restaurant concepts mostly through franchise and licensing. And my passion for wine really dates back to being in culinary school and cooking for a living back in the 90s and being around individuals who knew a lot about wine and just the accessibility that comes with being in the restaurant industry.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we sometimes have people who are still working in hospitality, like the Bobby Stuckeys of the world. And we have people like Raj Parr who have taken a step out and gone in the wine world in a different way. You've gone in food and then gotten deeper and deeper into the wine side, which is, it's really cool. I guess when we're talking about somebody who's more of like a collector and has a lot of passion, where did you first start in terms of I know you were informed by others and then you started diving in a little bit on your own passions. Where did you start and how has that blossomed?
Yeah. And I like this question because I think my answer parallels many individuals I know in the wine industry or around the wine community. So not just individuals who work for the industry, but those that just appreciate wine. Having been in culinary school and been a chef, certainly I was aware of wine. I was aware of wine pairings, but didn't have the appreciation that came later. And really, when I look back, and I know I've talked about my love of Lynch Bages and what a pivotal point was. In fact, I think you and I talked a little bit about that. But even predating that, there was a gentleman by the name of Chris Elliott, who I'm going to be nice to him as well and say he's at least 2 years older than I am. But Chris and I have similar taste in wine and similar taste in food. But Chris, being that 2 years older than I am and having more experience, it was great because if he liked something, there was a high likelihood that I was going to like it. And he had done very well in his career. He still drank a lot of wines that were at a level that I could purchase. So I remember another pivotal moment for me being when I got on the Turley mailing list and I was able to buy Turley, which I loved. And one of the first wines that I really had an appreciation for, even before the aforementioned Lynch Bages. But if I were to credit, I would say where I sit today with my passion and love for wine and various types of wines, it's certainly, you can read about it in magazines, you can experience yourself, but really those items that there was a trigger point or a fundamental point of inflection in my own knowledge or in my own tasting really came from a friend or a colleague or somebody I looked up to.
Yeah, I think you came across, and you're still exploring wine and with genuine curiosity. And I think that's really interesting because I've come across wine into wine the same way. I actually started looking at wine from an art history point of view while I was working in advertising. But I had worked for a Paso producer for a while and really got deeper into Paso and those wines. I hadn't really studied them at all in my sommelier training. And I feel like those, unless they're either people really in the know who are like, oh, Paso makes great wines, or people who just don't drink a lot of wine, but happen to come across some Paso wines that like them. But I feel like people who think they know about wine kind of scoff on Paso. And I think it's really cool how you've developed a love of California wines and Paso. Even as you've progressed, you still maintain this kind of affinity and passion to talk about it.
Listen, it wouldn't be a podcast with me on it if I didn't say something that required me to block at least 20 people on social media when it comes out. So I'm not going to say anything negative about any wine region in the world or any wine drinkers, lovers, but I am going to say specific to Paso Robles, in my opinion, represents everything that is really great about wine, food, and everything that goes around it, at least from my perspective. Great wines at a number of different price points that are approachable by a wide amount of wine lovers, a passion and heartfelt love for wine that is more forefront than let's say sometimes the rules or egotism or what have you that sometimes follow wine industry. I don't get that in passing. I get great restaurants and great hotels and great wineries. I see the same people. Milani at Turley, I saw her a few months ago. I went out for a fingers crossed and Saxon tasting, and I was sitting there trying to figure out with Milani how long I've known her, and it's well over 20 years that she has worked in the tasting room at Turley's. Not to speak ill of anything, but I am going to go on the record and say, I think Paso Robles represents, in my mind, everything that I love about wine and food and the coming together of both those items.
Yeah. I think you had a little anecdote that I heard somewhere else. Can you say your tidbit from Turley about the shape of his bottles and how they won't fit anywhere? I love that.
Yeah. Listen, I think Larry Turley is a really fascinating individual. And for years, Turley being the first mailing list I was on, super exciting about it. And at some point, I think back in the early 2000s, I got my first wine cellar of any appreciable size. To be disappointed that my beloved Turley bottles wouldn't fit in there. And I remember reaching out to Milani and saying, what's the Skippy? What's going on here? Why the heck won't these fit in there? She said, listen, Larry doesn't want people to hold on. He thinks that they should be drunk in their youth. And that's certainly not to say that they don't improve with age, and certainly they also do Petit Syrah, which I think is a very age-worthy varietal. But, Larry, my two favorite quotes from Larry are, I want you to drink them young or younger. So I've made them hard for you to hold on to. And also when I dinner with Zinfandels from across California, all the big producers, Martinelli and all the ones everybody knows, and certainly Turley. And I said, Larry, what should the wine pairings be? And I was, expecting the usual when you ask a winemaker or somebody who's passionate, foie gras and medium rare duck breast with blackberries. And his answer was a porterhouse as big as your head. Those are my two Larry Turley quotes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So since you started with Turley #1 and then you expanded throughout California, I know your cellar has icons like Sine Qua Non that you get regularly and like Screaming Eagle now. How did you progress further along and identify producers you wanted to be on the mailing list or in touch with in California? And then I guess we'll move on from there to talk more about your old world interest now too and how that's grown over the years.
Yeah, listen, in the U.S., California is a great place to start for a number of reasons. Apart from price, understanding that there are a lot of California wines that are very expensive and they're not approachable for most people. What I love about California is I think it's a low risk area. It's easy to understand the labels. It's easy to understand if they are blends, what the blends are. And California has become so consistent in winemaking that even in air quotes and off vintage, the wine is still going to drink well. And very rarely would I say I dislike a bottle of California wine, regardless of kind of the blender or the variety or where it's come from, as well as the vintage. So it was a great place for me to start. It was approachable, easy to understand. There has been a lot of inflation, certainly in the Screaming Eagles and the Harlans, and those wines are not approachable today, and maybe they weren't even approachable when they came out. But it was a great place to foster and for me to try different things. And being in the U.S., they were readily accessible. and they were easier for me to get my head around than say the French wines, which is when I look at the normative bell curve of myself and other advanced aged wine lovers like myself. You start in California, maybe you start with whites, you start with Cabernets, and then you begin to branch out and you look at Bordeaux, you look at the fantastic wines of Spain and Italy. And at least for me and many of the folks I know, this travel, this journey that starts in California ends in Burgundy, which is where I am now. I love that food and wine together make both better. And I'm as passionate about food as I am about wine. A great food and wine pairing makes both better. And when you're able to tap into your memory and say, wow, I know what food would pair with this wine or what wine would pair with this food, it absolutely, that knowledge is something that I really enjoy being able to put into practice.
Yeah. I think I was going to ask something else, but I think I really want to stay on the food and wine side. I know like the types of restaurants and things that you've built over the years definitely have a focus on being efficient, but also the flavor of building these flavors that would be enjoyable to a broader audience. Have you been able to use some of what you've learned in that process and parlay that over to your approaching tasting both wines and pairing wines with food?
Yeah, I think that's right. And listen, there's great books out there on food and wine pairing. And I love anytime I can take a great bottle of wine and have it in a casual setting, it tastes even better to me. Miles, having the In-N-Out burger at the end of Sideways, or Big Macs in Burgundy. I love that situation. And I think as you are able to experience more food, more wine, and begin to try things, you can have pairings that seem less intuitive, but work really, really well. If you search any of my social media, pizza and Pinot, and typically what I'm talking about is a red Burgundy and pizza. And I generally like lighter tomato sauces, as little cook on a tomato sauce as you can get, preferably a fresh, ripe, high water activity, fresh tomato sauce that's only cooked in the oven. I love the way that and a fantastic fresh mozzarella and a yeasty crust with some Maillard reaction. I love the way that pairs with both the fruit of a red Burgundy and the earthiness and minerality. And sometimes I'll get somebody who, you shouldn't be drinking that wine with that food. And every time somebody comments on that, I am pushed to look for more and more casual food pairings that really showcase that great wines are great wines, whether it's on a piece of china or whether it's in a napkin on the back porch.
That brings me to like wine snobbery. I know you're very big against, and you can tell with that pairing, the wine snobbery side, and it's something that resonates with me. I remember when I was first studying in my sommelier exams, I actually got into wine and started studying for exams on the side. So I was pairing like, I think my first Cote Rôtie, I had the half bottle of Cote Rôtie in New York with Taco Bell. So I'm right with you. But how have you approached and encountered snobbery in that sense on the way up? Because since you started from not a wine background, I assume as you've been trying to learn, you ask questions and people would like scoff at you or have pairings along the way. How did that work for you?
Yeah, I also don't want to be the anti-snob. What I would say is I don't like to practice food or wine judgment or snobbery. I worked for a company called Nathan's Famous for years. There's a lot of people that just do the Macaulay Culkin face slap. If you put ketchup on a hot dog, that's not how it was designed to be eaten. And I did a food show in Germany with Nathan's Famous in Germany with hot dogs, and everybody put ketchup on the hot dogs. And when I said, don't you eat them with mustard? And they said, no. And we eat them with ketchup. So I think I'm not going to say disdain for snobbery. I'm going to say my openness that people should eat what they want and they should seek enjoyment in the way that they enjoy it goes back to being a chef and being a young chef and having somebody like something on the menu. I remember back in 1995, somebody standing on a chair with a 35 millimeter camera and taking a picture of something I'd made. And that was like really important to me. It's not like today where everybody's got a camera phone. This person went to their car, brought in a camera and shot a photo. It was a big deal. But I also remember somebody loving something we had served them, and a waiter cautiously coming back to the kitchen because he was frightened at the reaction he was going to get from the line cooks, saying, listen, they really loved the boar sauce on this pasta. Could they get some more? With fear that, no, that's not how the chef envisioned the dish. So listen, to me, if you're in the kitchen, your goal should be to make people happy. And yes, it's through your art, and you certainly have the right to try to convey your art in a way that you like. But when I think of the chefs that just blow me away, guys like John George's rule is if it's in the kitchen, we'll make it for you. Wolfgang Puck, these guys have the biggest names, the biggest reputations. They're so phenomenally talented, but their belief is their job is to make you happy. Again, I don't want to be the anti-snob. I would say I support, there's things that I personally don't like, and maybe I personally don't understand. Pineapple on pizza. I don't get it. It's a lot of high water activity, fruit that doesn't seem to belong. But I can tell you, we make scratch pizza at home. We have a pizza oven. We love doing it. We do it as a family. And my daughter is a pineapple on pizza, and I try to make it as good as I possibly can. Long answer, but I think it's a really interesting topic.
Where do you draw the line of, I run into this all the time, and I've progressed with my girlfriend, now wife, but some of her friends, between them enjoying it, but them not having tried it necessarily the quote unquote right way. Say wine served at a proper temperature. I know you have a story about like ice cubes, but there's certain things where I want to tell them, just try it once. I'm not trying to be snobby. I think it might improve your experience. I'm trying to help, but if you don't like it, do whatever you like. What is your take on that?
I think it's a touchy subject. The wine in the ice cube goes back early, probably 1999 or 2000. I had a Turley Hayne Zinfandel. So their premier single vineyard Zinfandel, it costs, I think, probably $65, which back then was probably at the zenith of what I could afford. Brought one to a family dinner with my wife, and my mother-in-law put an ice cube in it. I remember just like being shocked, maybe just shy of horrified, but shocked. And it was actually a great experience for me because I don't let things go. I'm one of those people who, if I'm going to cook dinner or I've had dinner or I'm working on something, I think I get up at 3 a.m. Any of my team will tell you they've received messages from me at 3 a.m. saying, I don't think you're using the right pickle. We really need to solve that pickle conundrum. We need to get that worked out. But as I thought about that situation, I'm like, you know what? I'm the bad guy here. This is a woman I love. I'm very close to my mother-in-law. I can't wait to see her. I wish she would live with us. I wish we could see her more often. I think the world of her. I think the world of her daughter. And I'm thinking, you know what? You brought a wine because you wanted her to enjoy it. And her way of enjoying it was to put an ice cube in it. Who is the bad guy? If you don't know, it's you. You're the bad guy. So to answer your question, more out of food. If somebody says, I really don't like carrots, I might say, so you've never had a carrot you've liked? No. Have you ever had roasted carrot? No. Hey, if you would try a roasted carrot, it'd make me happy. I'll do something like that because growing up, my mother was not a great cook. Asparagus came out of a can, and asparagus out of a can is about as close to culinary CSK tear gas as you can get. The aroma, the texture, everything that's great in asparagus, canned asparagus is not. So I grew up thinking asparagus was the worst thing ever. It was like a prank. You gave somebody canned asparagus, and if they ate it, I don't know, they won a prize. But when I tried pencil thin grilled asparagus with grated egg over the top and a good salt and a good pepper, I absolutely love it. So if it's a food situation, I might ask questions. If I see somebody with a beautiful Riedel glass and they're holding it like it's a double rocks glass, I probably will keep that to myself. I do love the swirling. I love the way light plays with the viscosity and color of wine. Obviously, people know that I'm addicted to that look. I just absolutely love it. And if somebody says something and it's an opportunity for me to say, there's actually a reason that wine glasses are designed the way they are. And so I try to be more tactful because listen, we're talking about social media, Twitter or X, the subtext of that should be 50 million Americans that are happy to point out any of your misspellings, right? I'm trying not to be that guy. So I try to be very tactful. Now, if somebody asks a question, absolutely. I think that's if they open the door, I'm happy to walk through it and probably keep it open.
Nice. I think that's a great approach. I think over the years, that's what I've adopted as well. If they're having a good time, I might let them know. The bowl and the stem, I just like to let them know it's for temperature's sake. It's not just to be fancy, and that sometimes sways them. So it helps. But yeah, so over the years, as you've continued down your wine journey, where it led you to Burgundy here, where did you stop along the way? And then what have you collected that you've been filling your cellar with on your way to Burgundy?
Yeah, listen, I love the way Bordeaux works with food. And, to me, there was many years where I was practicing low carb or keto very religiously. I ate a lot of more kind of center cuts of meat and grilled meat, and just some of those items, Bordeaux's they do phenomenally well from a pairing standpoint. I love the Massetto and Ornellaia, Sassicaia. I love Italian wines. I spent a fair amount of time in Spain, and my appreciation for Spanish wines, probably similar to Australian wines, is while it may be easier to understand, I think those are countries it's easy to understand their wines and their wine program. You don't have to fret over a wine list. If you're in Paris and you're not fretting over a wine list, and by fret, I'm talking like financially, you're trying to figure out, what am I going to buy that I can afford that's going to delight the table and I'm going to enjoy. You don't have to do that in Spain. You grab a wine list and, the wine is at a very high quality. There's value there. So have loved my stops along the way to all of these countries. When we're talking about kind of food bias, one thing I do like to do with more advanced wine drinkers, so individuals who probably have knowledge that is far superior to my own, cellars that are larger than my own, is when they say, I don't like wines of Paso Robles, or I don't like Cinquenan, or I won't drink any Merlot. I love to take that opportunity if I feel that there's somebody who is honest and open, and say, listen, why don't you try this little Massetto that's a Merlot-based wine and see what you think. And listen, maybe you're looking at the ABV of a Cinquenan saying, I don't like wines that have that level of ABV, and maybe you don't. But I got to tell you, Manfred makes a high ABV wine that is so well integrated, it drinks like it's a 13% when maybe it's a 16.5 or 17%. So I love to maybe point out some of those wines that they may have bypassed on their way to La Tâche and Petrus.
Yeah, now I like that a lot. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, your cellar, and it's something you had mentioned previously, and I want to know if you're still keeping this up as well. So number one, you have an extensive cellar. I'd love to hear about the size now, and I know you've been trying to maybe not necessarily fill it up and just try more wines, but I also like how you let your friends just go down and just pick out bottles and bring them up regardless. I had an experience like this once with a buddy who was way further down the wine journey than me, and he had multiple wine fridges. He's like, just pick one. And I was like, are you serious? And it was like one of my favorite days. And it really helped me learn because I got to try a wine that I didn't think I would be trying otherwise. But yeah, can you tell us a little bit?
I think I'm going to answer, you asked two questions and then I'm going to answer three. So the first thing I would say, My answer, and I should have it written on the back of a business card, is my cellar is larger than it needs to be and smaller than I want it to be. And, but I would say that I do think if you have a broad love of wine, meaning you like everything from sparkling to sweet, red and white, you like wines with age, you like wines that drink well young. And if you're going to drink wine 3 to 4 times a week, I do think you get to a need to be probably around 1,500 bottles in order to, that just seems to be the magic number. If I was curating a wine list for a restaurant and I wanted the sommeliers to have the ability to tap into various wines for food pairings and different price points and different customer tastes, that to me, I would think they would need kind of 1,500 bins. So if there's a number out there, I think that's where it is. You talked about when I have guests over, not only is it fun and it's about hospitality. What I like about the restaurant industry is the hospitality. I like making people happy and the surprise and delight. I remember being a chef back in the 90s and people would come in and they would be vegetarian. And this was new to me. I didn't know what a vegetarian was. They ate vegetables. They liked them. And I remember the most exciting time for me as a chef is when somebody came in and they had a special request. So that kind of also goes back to maybe my bias against bias. I love the chance to maybe show off, but to create something and make somebody happy. That was really exciting. But when I have people over, if we're going to have a large group, typically what I'll do is I'll open a large format. I'll put it in multiple decanters. It would be something that would generally be liked by everyone. Might put some white wine out in coolers, might start with champagne. But the idea is when we get close to depleting that initial serving of wine is to pick somebody and say, go down to the cellar and grab a bottle and we'll open it. And there's only a couple of rules because sometimes it's much funner to have somebody who knows only a little bit about wine. If you have somebody who knows too much, they're going to price shop and they're going to price shop low. They're not going to pick a bottle that they think might be special. I have nothing in my cellar that I wouldn't open. So the only rules are if you come up with, because you think it's funny, you come up with a 12-liter bottle of wine, you stay until it's gone. Okay. So that kind of mitigates that. And if it's somebody who maybe is new to wine and you bring up a 750 or a Magnum of Chateau de Kim, that's awesome. But I am going to point out that was that really what you were looking for? This is typically would be paired or drunk in this fashion or what have you. Beyond that, there's no rules and there's a painting in my wine cellar. So to me, the intersection of food, wine, and art in music is all one. So I have pieces of art in the wine cellar. I love to have my headset on and listen to music. But one of the paintings, we did a housewarming party at the house that my wife and I live in now 5 or 6 years ago. And it was one of those nights where people were going down and they were bringing up bottles and we didn't even know what we opened because people were grabbing, and it was such a fun night. And we have a butler's pantry, which I think there's probably a nicer name for it, and probably also a place where you put your shoes when you come in from the garage, which is more what we use it for. But the next morning I got up and I went into this area off of our kitchen where we had some people helping us at this party. They had put all the empty bottles because does James keep them? Does he not keep them? Does he have to record them? They stacked them nicely. And I remember just looking at it and I took a picture of all of these empty bottles and had a painting made. And it's just all of the empties from this very social environment. So if there's 2 of your questions, the third I'm going to question is not even a question, but I've spent some time at culinary schools, big name culinary schools that have wine programs. I think one of the things I would challenge people who are listening to this is if you're in a restaurant, absolutely take the opportunity to share with the team. And I will, maybe a little bit of judgment. If I go in a restaurant and I'm trying to share some of my wine with the sommelier, with the team, and they say it's completely against restaurant policy, I will tell you that's probably at least a little bit of an eye roll on my side. It surprised me when I looked at some of these wine programs that wineries weren't helping these programs get access to harder to find wines. So you had people who were basically going to dedicate their careers and their lives and their livelihoods to the wine industry and trying to find great wines and make people happy through their knowledge of wine, who basically were having to come out of pocket and didn't have access to some of the wine. So I would say, listen, if you've got one of these great bottles of wine that are hard to come by, absolutely give 2 ounces to the team, let them experience it, hear what they think about it. And back to the hospitality aspect of all of this, I know how the wine tastes to me. I don't know how it tastes to them. And I love hearing that. The third answer to the question you didn't ask is maybe just a comment that I think it's important to share. Those of us who are fortunate to have some of these great bottles, don't take for granted that the SOM team or the wait team has had access to some of these. And it's great because it's going to pay dividends, because down the road, they're going to know more about wine and they're going to help you and your friends when you come in again.
Yeah, no, I love that. I hadn't heard really anybody kind of making that like a goal of theirs before. But when you're doing this, you're talking more about things like Grand Cru Burgundy or things that are very expensive that they probably could. You're not just giving them like I don't know, like a Camus, just run of the mill Camus or something, right?
No, I'm somebody who loves restaurants that have an opportunity to bring wine and practice corkage. And I try to be very, very respectful of that because I'm in the restaurant industry and I understand that it is not a right. It's a privilege to be able to do that. Would I bring a bottle of Camus? No, I probably wouldn't bring a bottle of Camus because it's pretty ubiquitous on lists. But having said that, I like Paso Robles wines. I think when I look at Saxum, it is a world-class wine. I might bring a bottle of Saxum that costs $65 when I bought it a number of years ago. It's not a particularly expensive bottle of wine. And I'll ask somebody if they're familiar with it. It's not that that's not an approachable price point. They may just not have tried it. What I would say is I try to bring wine to restaurants that I think there's a reason to bring it. I've either paired it in advance. And again, we've already talked about my obsessive compulsive persevering over details. I don't go into restaurants unless I've looked at their menu and their wine list, probably talked to the chef, maybe talk to the sommelier. So I've brought a bottle of wine that I think specifically will pair not only with the food, but also who I'm with. And it may not be an expensive bottle of wine, but it might be something that an individual hasn't tried in the restaurant. One of them, Samiotti. Samiotti is one of the greatest Shirazes I've ever had. It is absolutely an amazing bottle of wine, but it is very hard to find in the US. And most sommeliers have not had a chance to try it. But here's this, in my opinion, world-class Australian Shiraz. And I love giving them access to that because it's hard to come by regardless of price. So I would say the wines that I'm bringing have a purpose for me bringing them. And more often than not, they're going to be wines that make sense to offer to the team.
That's so interesting. Where in Australia is that from? I worked a vintage in Australia and I brought back some wine. So I have a Rockford basket press, which is in the same boat. It's not very expensive there, but it's impossible to get here. Yeah, that's really cool. Where's that one?
Yeah, it's Barossa. I think to me, it's similar to Cinquenan from an overall aesthetic standpoint. What I mean by that is it's a unique bottle with a unique label. It is very heavily extracted. It's high alcohol, but I've drunk enough of the Samiotti now, and I've drunk it with people who I really respect. Chefs that have been around for 40, 50 years, sommeliers. And it's one of the things I think is very unique about Samiotti is wines generally have this evolution in the glass, whether you're going to pour it in a decanter or whether it evolves in the glass. But over time, as it reacts with oxygen, you have this evolution of flavors. But it tends to be along a curve, right? Wow, it's really opening up all of these wine terms that depending on how you say them, can sound really snobby or really cool or just accurate. Hopefully I'm the accurate one. But Semiote was one where I didn't find the evolution to be along a curve. I found it to be more like stairs. Drinking this wine, I was with a chef friend of mine by the name of Mark Miller. We were at a Wolfgang Puck restaurant. We were drinking some vintage Margaux, but also the Semiote that no one had tried before. And we poured it in the decanter. We had a sip, and Mark looked at me and says, "What does that taste like, Hugh?" And I said, "It tastes like Kalamata olives." He said, "Exactly." He goes, "That tastes like Kalamata olives." And then 15 minutes later, everything to Mark, we're very similar from a culinary standpoint. Everything is a culinary emergency. "James, the avocados are right now." He like grabs me by the shoulder like there's an emergency or a celebrity's walked in. And he says, "Taste that Semiote and tell me what you got." All right. I said, "Wow." I said, "That's completely different. It's not evolved. It went from Kalamata olives to tasting our ripe blueberry." He cut me off. He says, "Ripe blueberry." So we have this idea, because this wine evolves in such a dramatic fashion. And we've had several of these bottles and have this similar kind of non-linear, non-bell curve experience where we said, what if we did wine pairing dinner, but paired against one wine or different wines, but as they evolve? So what does that wine taste like when it's first poured? What does that wine taste like in 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and put that together? So we still think it's a great idea that we haven't executed against. So somebody could execute that and just invite me, and it'll make things much easier for me.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. I think that makes a lot of sense. On your exploration side of things, how are you finding things? Are you just making your way around Burgundy? Are you reading like certain critics? Are friends recommending wines? How are you discovering something new?
I think all of the above. And that to me is what's great. I go back to my comments on Chris Elliott. For me, it is important to try to sync up, right? So there's individuals who have phenomenal wine knowledge, but only drink wines when they're 100% in the tertiary flavor phase, right? And I love teasing these people. This wine just hit 42 years old. There's no red hues at all. And I'm like, yeah, that pesky primary fruit Valois, right? They only like older wine. And I like wines all along their lifespan. So to me, it's important for me to understand in my circle of friends and confidants and colleagues who has a similar taste where they say, "Listen, I've had this. It's fantastic." Most recently, I really respect Oregon wines, but there hasn't been a lot of Oregon wines where I'm wow, this is absolutely phenomenal. And when you have a bottle of wine, right? Because everybody today has one of these, but what do we got there? 1990 Sasakai, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's my screensaver. So when you have a wine you love, it's one sip, wow, that's good. Second sip, wow, that's really good. Third, wine searcher, right? Where can I buy that? If I see somebody pick up, I know they like it. Kevin, a friend of mine, probably will be obliged to listen to this because I'll just tell him I said something about him and he'll be frightened what it was. But we were in Deer Valley at a restaurant, and he had a colleague join us, and they brought a bottle of Antica Terra, which is a wine that I hadn't heard of. And listen, I read a lot, and I hadn't heard of it. And again, trying to be open. Generally, when I think of Oregon wines, I do think they're Burgundian in nature, but they tend to be lighter in extraction. And I tend to like more robust Pitos. Antica Terra, wow. To me, it was the best of Oregon, but had more of the extract and viscosity of like a Marcusson level wine. And this is something to me, I don't even think I got a second sip, and had joined their wine club and was on Wine Searcher and where can I get some? So yes, reading, subscribe to the reviewers, read the magazines, look at social media, but it's great when you have someone where you're calibrated in to what they like. You enjoy the same wines or same styles or what have you. And they say, "Listen, have you heard of this?" "No, you haven't." great. Let me bring a bottle of that. For me, Samiote is a great way for me to show those friends of mine that do the heavier extracted, higher ABV, more crowd pleaser types of wines. And the reverse side of that, bringing a bottle of Antica Terra, and I was absolutely blown away.
So we ask a lot of these either wine writers or people covering this space. And I'd like to get your point of view as a collector and somebody well-versed in very, I guess, the most traditional wines possible. Are you drinking any of these, like part of the natural wine movement producers at all? Or are you into any orange wine or skin contact? Even like not formal, but like you really well-made skin contacts, Radicon or Grosvenor or anything. Are you experimenting with those?
I would say I'm experimenting when suggested by a sommelier. I think you may know this, you may not. I try to eat only once a day, 3 to 4 meals a week. I have no alcohol and I try to stay around 500 to 600 calories. People see these, how do you not weigh 400 pounds? We don't know. Maybe I do weigh 400 pounds. Okay. Well, whatever. But I do try 3 to 4 days a week, no alcohol, and to really limit myself from a caloric standpoint. So basically what we're saying is 3 to 4 times a week, I eat a meal and I either make it at home or we eat out. And being very planful, it's really important to me, if that's the only time I'm going to eat that day, that it's enjoyable, that I have a good time. So I would say I experiment with lots and lots of research. But the caveat to that is, and I'm trying to stay away from 2 and 3 Michelin star restaurants. I think it's the wrong message for me to convey to people. I am this year am really trying to make a concerted effort to go to restaurants that anybody can get into and that most people can afford. Because listen, anybody can go to Noma or Alinea and say, I had a great meal. Really? And great. And by the way, did you know the Bentleys have a pretty smooth ride? Who cares? So the few times that I am going to a 2 or 3 Michelin star restaurant where they have a sommelier who has tried everything on the menu and really has a vision, I will do the wine pairing. I don't normally do that. Normally, I'll pick a bottle of wine that I think will take me through the meal. And more often than not, I try to be 3 courses. If I can't figure out what a chef's trying to do in 3 courses, another 20 courses is not going to help. But the few times that I am going to those, and not only natural wines, but orange wines and some of those, and have really enjoyed them. But again, I would say at this point, definitely still loving to try things, loving to try new things, but doing so with a lot of research or a lot of guidance.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. We're coming up on time here because I know you're really busy. Where can folks follow you to follow your wine journey? I know you're on a lot of platforms these days.
Yes, I like to. Somebody asked me, hey, if we wanted you to, what are your rules for reviewing wine? And I said, I don't really have rules for reviewing wine, but I will only comment. If you send me a bottle of wine, I will not review it unless I like it. And which means I'm not a wine reviewer and I'm not a restaurant reviewer. I try to only share positive. So someone will say, hey, I saw you went to Houston. I didn't see you comment on any restaurants. And I might say, yeah. So I started a website. It's just J Walker Mobile, JWALKERMOBILE. And it has all of the links to where people can interact with me. It does have all of my recommendations, not only for restaurants, but just if there's things like there's a smoked Spanish olive oil I just absolutely love. Malden salt. Malden salt ignores the fact that I exist. These guys have never tagged me. They've never responded to a post. And like, I'm their biggest fan. So the fact that if you go to my website and it's, here's where you get Malden salt, they're not paying me a dime. They're not only are they not paying me, they're not even paying attention to me. And I'm out there. Everyone should be using Malden salt. So jwalkermobile.com is the best place to interact with me.
Awesome. I think that's a perfect place to end it. I know I'll be tagging along and following. So thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right. That was our interview with James Walker. If you're like James and like to share your wines from your cellar with your family and friends, then you should get a Corbin. With a Corbin, you can share everybody's favorite wine without having to pop the cork on any one bottle. And that is our interview for this week. And we'll be back with another exciting episode next week. Cheers.